think we're nearly there.
That's our slide.
Good evening, and thanks so much for coming tonight to our special Bibliotherapy Live, which is broadcasting from Exeter from the
Ella's
wonderful.
bed.
So, this is a special Bibliotherapy Live with Patrick Gale, and we might rename it In Bed with Ella, we're thinking.
Yeah. She's in
Um,
my book bubble in case you're worrying about COVID distance.
Exactly. And we have just spent the last 3 days together, and we've just done a lovely event together at Quayside in Exeter.
At
Um,
the old custom house.
yes, and that's why tonight's episode of Bibliotherapy Live will be a little bit shorter than my usual hour-long ones, because Patrick also has to get his beauty sleep so that he can be writing up
All
bright and
day tomorrow.
early
Yeah.
tomorrow. So, for people that haven't met Patrick and don't know his books, he is a wonderful novelist based in Cornwall who has written so many novels that he's actually lost count. Is it 17 or is
Ish,
it?
ish. I think I'm writing the 17th, I think. Yeah.
Yes, excellent.
And then there are two books of short stories and a life of Armistead Maupin.
And Patrick has also written screenplays, including the fantastic Man in an Orange Shirt, which came out 2017.
Yes,
And
yes.
was highly acclaimed. And he's now working on his probably 17th novel, if we've got it right. Excuse the slightly low tech technology tonight.
Because the bed
Um,
is stable, it's Ella who's not.
so one of the I wanted to get Patrick to talk to me this evening about his books, partly because I've always found myself prescribing his novels, possibly more than any other novelist. And actually, Patrick's novel, Notes from an Exhibition, is one of the first ones I ever prescribed to anyone when I started the bibliotherapy service with Susan Elderkin back in 2008. And I always found myself prescribing Notes from an Exhibition to many people.
Hmm.
And there's several reasons that I prescribe it, not always the same reason. One of them is because it's so brilliant about mothers and their kids and the relationships between mothers and kids and how complex they are. It's the story of a mother and four children. And Patrick's going to tell you in a minute more about the plot. But also, it touches on mental illness and in quite a major way. And I think that's one of the reasons that I find it such a powerful and compelling book and a very therapeutic book. So, Patrick, I wondered how you feel about being prescribed
Well,
as medicine.
I'm honoured. I'm honoured, and I think that book in particular um, seems to strike a chord with a lot of people. I think because most people had a family or have a family, most people had a mother, and most people, if they're honest, have a slightly ambiguous relationship with their mother. I think the nature of motherhood, which that book explores, is always going to be ambiguous. And what really interested me was to write a book about an amazing woman, what the sort of woman who would be amazing to anyone who met her. Only she's also a slightly nightmarish mother because you can't be both at once. And I was interested in exploring the artistic sacrifices or the maternal sacrifices that get made if a woman is a brilliant person, a brilliant creator, in her case, a painter, who happens to have four children and a husband, all wanting a bit of her as well.
Yes, and I really think that's one of the reasons that I love the book so much and relate to it myself, as I'm also a painter.
Right.
And I did really feel it touched a nerve, and it's very clear in the book how the painter is making immense sacrifices. But she also loves being a mother. I mean, I know she does.
Intermittently.
Yes.
Intermittently. I mean, I was really struck by the discovery that because she is bipolar, she has bipolar disorder, and one of the things that happens when you're prescribed lithium carbonate as your standard treatment for bipolar disorder is that it affects your fertility, and people aren't quite sure if it's safe to keep taking it while you're pregnant or while you're breastfeeding. So I
Yeah,
then
it's rather
asked around
horrifying.
and did a bit of reading up on this and discovered it was quite common for bipolar women who are on lithium, to elect to come off it when they got pregnant. And I then checked and discovered that a lot of creative people on lithium because of bipolar disorder played with the fact that often their most creative periods happened at the most dangerous time, when their manic behavior was reaching a really dangerous point. So just before the collapse, they would write their best poem or do their best painting. So I then thought, aha, what about a family that discovers, where the children discover quite possibly they only exist because of their mother's selfish urge to do her best work, which she can only do by getting pregnant, which gives her the excuse to come off the lithium. So
Yeah, it's a
it's a
rather
chicken egg thing.
dark
But
maternal
I was
tale.
also very inspired by Barbara Hepworth, who was the great woman artist of St Ives near where I live,
Yes, and
because
she plays a star role in the
she
book.
plays a walk-on role in the book, partly to prove that she isn't the heroine. But the heroine was inspired by her, because the thing with Barbara Hepworth is there are loads of accounts of what a bad mother she was, and a neglectful mother, and yet
She left
neither.
her triplets behind.
Yes, but neither of the surviving daughters has ever written a kiss and tell memoir about her, which I find
Interesting.
that very interesting. So I thought, okay, maybe they decided there was a compensation. You might have had a bloody difficult mother, but she was a genius, and how lucky we were to grow up with a genius for a mother. So
Yeah.
yeah, we're tough on mothers, and we expect them to be absolutely perfect. So that book, I think, muddies the waters, I hope, a bit.
Yes, I do find it very interesting, partly because I obviously read it with rather rosy tinted lenses, I think, because I see it as a positive creative book about
Right,
a woman coping with motherhood and her artistic work. Whereas I know it has a lot of darkness and a lot of moments where, in fact, she doesn't cope and things go quite
totally.
pear-shaped.
And on one level, it's not. On one level, it's about her, but on another level, it's about how her children and husband survive her, how they
Yes,
withstand and survive her, because she is a force of nature. And it doesn't give much away to say that she dies right at the start of the book, because her story in the book is told backwards. So we start with her in a kind of raving rage towards the end of her life, and a fizz of creativity, because she's been secretly avoiding taking her lithium for days.
mm,
And we then spiral backwards to the dark heart of her story when she was a teenager and something terrible happens to her, which triggers all sorts of things that are, you've wondered about in the course of the book. So on one level, it's a mystery, but around those chapters, we have chapters told from the viewpoint of her four children and her husband, which illuminate her story, but also show how they have been shaped by her and have withstood her to some extent.
yes, I think that's the other thing that I totally love about the book, that you get all the different perspectives of her children. And the things that they remember are often the beautiful days that they spent with her
Yes,
on
on
her
their birthdays.
birthdays.
Yes, because she has the one charming thing about her as a mother is she has this, actually, I think, slightly aggressive tradition, which is that when each child has a birthday, they get her all to themselves for the whole
Yes,
day. And woe betide them if they come up with something boring. They've got to
it's
do
quite
something.
passive
Yes,
aggressive,
they've
isn't
got to
it?
come up with something interesting to do with her. And we see at least one of those chapters from the viewpoint of her daughter, who at that stage we don't realise is inheriting the bipolar disorder from her mother.
Yes.
Um,
Can you explain the format to people that don't know the book, the reason it's called Notes from an Exhibition?
yes, absolutely. The book, as I said, the chapters are structured as a double helix, but before each chapter, we get a little example of what's called wall text in the trade, which is that little note they have on the wall beside a painting or an art object in an exhibition. So that as you're going through the book, in effect, you are walking through a retrospective exhibition of the heroine's work.
Yes,
Um,
because we realise she's a very famous and successful artist.
she's
You never
hugely,
actually
yes.
state where the exhibition is,
No,
do
and
you?
I don't think that
But I,
matters.
I
I
always
don't think that
imagine it's the
matters, and
Tate.
I think the key thing is that you get little bits of information in those notes that you don't get anywhere else in the book. So the reader is the only one who knows the whole thing. The reader is
Yes.
picking together, and some of the notes are inaccurate, so they're written with a rosy tinted view of what her life was like, and then we get the real view after we read the notes. And each one of those notes comes before the chapter in which that work of art was created or was shown or we come across it or something. So it's very much about, on that level, it's about the way we mythologize artists, sometimes
Yes.
even while they're still alive, as a way of making their story less chaotic and more bearable. Because often artists' lives are pretty terrible and full of raw edges.
And their children are frequently wounded
And
by those
yeah,
raw edges.
yeah.
There's a lovely quote about the book that I just want to read, which is one of your readers. It just came up on a random website saying, "This is one of those novels you'll always be glad you read. It's 7 hours of your life well spent. It's a book uh, of the kind that readers can come away armed with new ideas and reassurances
Wow.
about their own family life."
Hmm.
Which I must admit, that's the way that I've always read it. I felt as if, in a way, reading it has armed me with new ways of coping with my own family. And actually, I read it. I think I'm just trying to think if I already had children when I first read it. When
It
did it come out?
didn't put you off. I think it was
No.
2006 or 7, something like
Yeah,
that.
so I did already have
Yeah,
children,
yeah.
but it definitely made me feel differently about being a mother
Right.
and about ways of coping with being a mother, and possibly did give me a bit of a sense of license to go off and do lots of painting and ignore my children. Though, of course, I've always devoted myself to my children. Um, but and I've actually tried doing that thing of taking them off for a day off school, and it hasn't always worked. But it's a lovely
Yes.
template and idea to have. So I think it's a highly complex and brilliant novel that I actually love going back to. But I have noticed that in many of your novels, you do have people with various mental issues. And I
Yeah.
wondered why that is and what it is that draws you to those areas of life, particularly.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think it's partly just the novelist in me wanting to destabilize the plot. And just as I have a lot of children in my books, who are similarly useful, because children are frank. There's a candor to childhood that adults learn to lose. So within a plot, a child can really shake things up. But also, I think it's just a personal fascination. There was quite a bit of mental illness around me when I was growing up. Um, a very close sibling had a nervous breakdown when I was still a child, and Notes and Exhibition draws a lot on that.
Mm.
Um, but I've also written about Alzheimer's, and um, that was in my novel Rough Music, and that was inspired more by my mother, who just had a terrible, terrible car accident, which I was in with her when I was about 10 years old, and she had such bad brainstem injury and a really bad stroke that she in effect had a second childhood. She had to learn to speak again and swallow and um, write.
Which also comes into your book, Take Nothing With You.
Yeah, it does, but I remember my mother saying when she was trying to remember how it felt, that it was like being on an ice floe that was melting, and she got this terrifying sense that her personality had gone, because her personality, she was very talky like me, and she realized her personality was so expressed in words that when her language had gone, she felt as if her personality had left the room too, and she was really disturbed and frightened by that. And the novelist in me stored that up, because I thought, oh God, well, we work so hard as writers to create characters, but what if we put it into reverse and watch the character melt and lose
Mm.
lose that sense of self? So I think it's partly because I most of my books write from the point of view, internally from the. I don't have a narrator as such. I go through different viewpoints,
Mm.
and when one of those characters is suffering from a mental illness, it destabilizes their sense of self. It destabilizes the characters around them, and I'm very interested in the effects in a family. If you have one person who is suddenly unstable for whatever reason, the
Yes.
compensatory kind of leaning in that the siblings or the husband or the wife has to do. Um,
Yeah, so I love
it
the
is
way
very
you
interesting.
handle that in Take Nothing With You, because
Well,
the
that's a very
mother, that one,
1970s story because in
yes,
that that's set at a period which I remember all too well when mental illness was not talked about, and
no,
nice families didn't have mentally ill people.
no,
Just
it's
like they didn't
swept
have
under the
divorce, it
carpet.
was not discussed, and it was treated pretty brutally with just massive doses of drugs and collective forgetfulness. So the father in Take Nothing With You is having a slow motion nervous breakdown in the course of
Yes,
the
it's
book,
so
but
tragic.
because his wife is the great egomaniac, she draws all the attention to herself. So even the reader doesn't notice at first quite what is happening, and then the poor young hero, who's still only a little boy, is left between shuttling between the two of them and their different the different needs set up in the mother's case by her mental damage from a car crash, and in the father's case from his depression and increasing dependence
Yes,
on Valium.
it's more and more tragic the more I think about it.
But
But
it's happy ending. It's
yes,
fine.
strangely
Happy ending.
enough, it is a book
Yeah,
that does feel good at the
yeah. I
end,
hope
but
so.
as
I hope
one
so.
gets there through quite a lot of huge ups and downs. And actually, we were talking earlier about how I think that's a particularly good lockdown book because the hero is effectively
Yeah,
locked.
he is locked down because he's sent to hospital at the beginning of the book, and
Yeah.
basically the narrative, the childhood narrative you read, is emanating from the memories he is having as he just lies on a hospital bed, waiting for his chemotherapy to work.
Yes, and the phrase "take nothing with you" is referring to that he should take nothing into
Yes, because
the.
he's having radioactive iodine treatment, and that makes
Yes.
your entire body, but also everything with you, irradiated to the point where it's not safe to take it away. So you're always told to wear disposable clothes, bring books you don't mind throwing away. So the one thing he brings with him is music on a little disposable MP3 player given to him by a girlfriend. And that music is all cello music associated with his boyhood. So, in a strange way, it's a very psychotherapeutic novel,
It is.
because the heroine, the girlfriend, who is a sort of heroine, is in effect forcing him through the music to relive the damage and the joy, but especially the damage of his boyhood. And the implication that you gradually come to realize, the implication of the title is that one of the things he will, we hope, leave behind him when he leaves the hospital is the damage. He will have finally laid it to rest by reliving it with us through the book.
Yes, and I'm actually amazed more and more the more I think about it and talk to you about your books, how many of them do have deep psychiatric
they, do,
issues
they
going
do.
on.
Well, even if it's not overtly in the plot, I think a lot of them follow a basic psychotherapeutic journey. So they will
Yes,
begin with a character in crisis, or a character whose life is failing because of a basic inconsistency in their thinking, or dishonesty in their own views of
yes,
themselves.
true.
So Rough Music, in the course of that book, we see a man who at the beginning of the book thinks he's happy, achieve real happiness at the end by picking apart the false happiness, the
Yes.
construct he has built to help himself survive.
And how about A Place Called Winter? Because that's a book with quite a lot of deep, dark issues as well,
Yes, yes. Though on
particularly.
one level, that's a more straightforward narrative. It's a Western. It takes a man from a position of effete luxury to one where he is really having to learn to be a man. Not just build
Yes.
his own house with his bare hands, but fight off a psychopathic rapist in the darks
Yes.
of the Canadian woods and all that. So it's a very dramatic story,
And so
but
crops
it
on
is again a
unpleasant
psychotherapeutic
fields.
book because the book is framed with these snapshots of the hero Harry in some kind of, it's not quite, it's a mysterious place. It's not exactly a hospital. It's a kind of retreat for the mentally ill, where you
Yes.
gradually realize the thing all these patients in this rather luxurious place have in common is a sexual aberration, as they were
Yes.
then called. So Harry, we realize, is there because he's gay, but there's another character who's there because he likes dressing up in women's clothes and so on. And so they're all in their different ways being treated. But of course, what happens to Harry there. I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but it's actually the final stage of his becoming his true self.
Yes. I really love that book. That's also one that I very frequently recommend to
Oh, good.
people
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled.
because I love the adventure of it, the going out to Canada and the discovering himself there and the manliness of it. But it's got a huge amount of tenderness in it as well.
Well, it's got four very good women. I love all the women in that book.
Yes.
And in a way, it falls into four sections, and each of the different sections has a different setting and a different heroine. Though, of course, the final heroine is not a woman. She's a two spirits,
Yes.
she from the local Cree tribe.
Yes. And that character is a really fascinating character as well, who goes through a huge amount of awful
Oh God! Well, it's a
treatment.
tragedy. It is a tragedy. It's a very that element of the book is very angry.
Yeah.
I didn't realize until I researched that novel just how appallingly we behaved in Canada. I'd grown up with the very English myth that the Americans were the bad ones,
Yeah.
and south of the border, the Americans did terrible things to the poor Ojibwa and Chippewa and all the other tribes, whereas we in Canada were lived in harmony. It's complete piffle.
Yes, and also because Canada's progressive now, one always
Yes,
thinks it
yes,
must
one
have been
forgets,
then.
but actually we did terrible things there. And one of the worst things we did, as we did in Australia, was systematically stealing the children of the First Nations tribes to raise
Yeah.
them without their culture in order to make them servants. So we gave them on purpose a limited education, made them speak English, didn't let them go through any of the rituals of their tribes in order to become men and women and adults in the eyes of their tribes. And then, lo and behold, a whole load of them ended up in psychiatric hospitals, which is where we see that character Little Bear. And
Yeah.
the real shock is that policy, those native schools, continued until the 1970s.
That is
It's really
incredible.
shocking. So
Yeah.
it is entirely a British crime. It's not a Canadian. They inherited the crime, but it was our crime.
Yes.
And interesting, when the book came out that very year, there was a Truth and Reconciliation report in Canada into the long-term effect of that policy and the
Oh,
lasting
really?
damage it did to the fabric of First Nations society. So,
Yes. So, as we're talking about me prescribing your books to
uh-huh.
people, I wondered which of your books you feel is perhaps the most therapeutic, which you would consider. I know it's a horrible question for an author to think, what would you prescribe? And I
Yeah.
know,
I think rough music, actually. When people ask me which of your book, I've just read one of your books, which do I read next? I often say rough music. I think because it's a novel set around a family holiday on a beach, which is a pretty primal thing. You know,
mm,
certainly most English readers have gone through that. They've endured that at some point in their childhood, and maybe they still love it and still go on family beach holidays. Um, but the holiday in this book, well, there are two holidays side by side, one in the 1960s and one in the present day. And you gradually realize that the two families are the same family, but that something terrible happened at the end of the 1960s holiday that's damaged them all forever and needs unpicking.
mm,
And it's on the one hand, it's a book about unpicking family damage and learning to be honest about learning to stand, especially for gay men, learning to turn around to your mother and say, "You hurt me," or your father. Um, you hurt me, but I forgive you, and now let's move on. But it's also, in a way, about the way families need to be more elastic with each other.
mm,
Because in both the storylines, there's a cardinal sin against the family is committed. So both the heroine and her son are caught out having affairs with their brothers-in-law. That's a, I'm
yes,
giving away a huge bit of the plot, but you'll
yes.
have forgotten that when you come to read the book again because it's structured in a very naughty way. So it's a book people throw across the room in irritation when they get when they get to the
I never
twist.
did.
Well, yeah, I did once see a woman on a train reading it, and she got to I could see how far she got in the book, and she suddenly slapped it down on the table with an audible kind of. But then she
Tapping.
picked it up again and carried on reading. So I thought, okay,
Did you reveal yourself?
no, 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 no.
You should have done. Would have been
Yeah.
great. So, are there any books that you have turned to in hours of trauma that you would see as your therapy book?
Oh, totally, totally. Jane Austen, mainly, actually. I find Persuasion, I think, is the great novel of romantic consolation. And I go back to it time again, and I think it has one of the sexiest heroes in Jane Austen. He's terribly British and terribly stifled emotionally, but he comes through at the key moment. And it's a book it's deeply romantic with a big R. I mean, given when it was written, and you've got that sense of the Napoleonic Wars and the whole kind of romantic revolution going on in the background. It's a fantastic book, and I go back to that time again. But I also frequently reread Mansfield Park, which I
Mm,
find immensely therapeutic in a slightly different way. Mansfield Park is notable it's not named after the heroine. It's quite a cool,
yes.
wonderfully structured book, and it moves the characters around like pieces on a chessboard. But it's incredibly funny, I think, about the brutality of families and the kind of ghastly arrangements they come to contain money and to contain embarrassment and shame.
Mm.
Um,
Do you think it's partly the familiarity with the book that makes it therapeutic for you, that you love to go back to
I
it?
don't know, no, because I think with both those books, they seized me when I first read them. I remember
Mm,
Persuasion really moving me in a way I wasn't expecting to at all, because it's funny. It's very funny along the real sleight of hand, and I think one of the reasons I love rereading Persuasion is, as a novelist, I've never quite managed to work out how it works. It's like a brilliant piece of clockwork because on the one hand, it's got this wonderful strain of very funny humour at the expense of numerous characters in it. But on the other, it's got this heart on sleeve, will they, won't they romance, which you totally believe in and worry about.
mm.
So, yeah.
I'm going to have to reread it
Do,
myself.
do, do, do. It's never wasted.
So, also, when you're writing your own novels, do you consciously turn to books thinking, I'm having a bit of a moment of block? What can I read just to give myself some inspiration?
That's a hard one. I mean, I tend to avoid reading much fiction
Mm,
when I'm working on a novel, partly because I'm terrified of just um,
plagiarizing.
no, it's more I'm scared of just being totally demoralized because the book is
Oh.
so bloody good. I think, well, why should I bother? Um, so if I do read fiction when I'm writing, it actually tends to be brand new stuff
Mm,
um, that I can just think, oh, that's lovely and well done her or well done him without. I mean, I'm not saying it won't be brilliant, but it won't be as shatteringly brilliant as, say, Persuasion or whatever. But I tend, for the most part, to read non-fiction when
ah,
I'm
yes.
writing.
Well, you're also
Um,
doing lots of research
I always do
currently.
research because my life has been so useless. As I've only ever been a writer. And so every book I write, there's a character in it who has to have a job, and I never, I don't understand jobs, so I have to kind of research them and find out
It's one of the
what
wonderful
they
things about
do.
Patrick that you have always just worked through your writing, which is pretty amazing. Not many writers can make that claim to
Well,
fame.
yeah,
And you started young as well.
I did. I was a wee thing.
Yes. So, what about your current novel that you're writing
Oh,
now?
well, that's another historical one. Though it doesn't feel historical while I'm writing it, it feels as if it's happening now. And it's loosely based on the wonderful Cornish poet Charles Causley and his no less wonderful mother, Laura, who was a single mother, a widow for most of his life. And what fascinates me about them, the unanswered question that makes me want to write the book, is that at the end of the Second World War, during which he had been off at sea in the Navy, working as a coder and having all sorts of adventures, he elected to come back and live with his mother and teach in a little primary school that he had gone to himself in Launceston, which is one of the quietest little towns you can imagine. Um, so, what I'm trying to do in the book is to come up with a good reason, sufficient reason for him to choose dullness, if you like, which
Yes.
sounds like an odd drift for a story, but it's also inspired by his poems, because whenever he was quizzed later in life and people said, Charles, why don't you write a memoir? You've had such an interesting life. Why don't you write a memoir? He used to say, oh, well, there's no need because it's all in my poems. And
Mm.
it is. There are one or two poems in which, if you're looking for it, it's as if he's hiding in plain sight. And there's one in particular called Angel Hill, on Angel Hill, about him, maybe it's Charles, maybe it's just the narrator, being visited unexpectedly at home by a sailor who claims forgotten friendship. He says, "You don't remember, but we fought side by side. I bound your wounds and you bound mine." And as the poem goes on, the sailor seems to be almost threatening with this intimacy, saying, "You forget, but I haven't forgotten, and I will come for you again." And it's very eerie because you can almost believe that this sailor is a ghost. But of course, me being mischievous, I'm just thinking, well, this is an old lover who's come back to rattle a cage with a primary school teacher.
Surely.
So
Well,
read on. But
yes.
suffice it to say, I am in the throes of gaying a Cornish hero, and I'm getting ready for lots of anger from the old men with beards.
Well, also knowing you and your novels, I know that you say that he's
I'll do it
choosing
kindly.
boringness,
I'll do
but
it kindly.
it's not going to be boring. I know it will
No,
be really exciting.
no,
And
not.
does it have one of your strange double helix structures?
No, the structure is straightforward in that it goes from the beginning to the end, but it swings between the mother and the son. So there are equal chapters all the way through. And it's interesting to start with. I was doing that myself. I was writing the book as you will read it. So mother, son. But now that Charles has gone off to war, I've realised I have to stop writing the mother's chapters and just stay with him because he was away for so long, so much of the war, so far away. So I stay in his head, and then I'll come back and write her chapters. And her chapters on the home front are every bit as dramatic as his chapters away, because amazing things happen. Launceston's a sleepy little town, but it had a German prisoner of war camp, an Italian prisoner of war camp. It had a whole invasion of GIs, and it had among the GIs, it had basically a race riot. There was a mutiny trial as a result of black soldiers stealing guns in order to open fire on the white soldiers. So there's a lot going on.
Wow!
And that Charles's mother would have seen it all. So.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, Patrick, thank you so much. It's been really lovely to be able to turn the tables on you.
I've loved sharing your bed.
It's been excellent, and hopefully we'll have another chance to do something similar next time we're in Exeter together.
Here's hoping.
And thanks for joining us tonight. Next week I'll be doing another of my Facebook Lives from home back in Hurstpierpoint, so join me then. And meanwhile, thanks so much to Patrick Gale.
Bye all.
Bye.